Okay, and we are live. Excellent. All right. So thanks so much, Sami, for saying yes to have a conversation here with me at the Mindful AI Manifesto. And I'd love to start with a little bit of introduction for those watching us live or perhaps the recording later. I'll start with introducing Sami with his formal bio. And then we'll engage in a conversation. So, Sami Mäkeläinen is an internationally experienced foresight and strategy professional with an in-depth knowledge of the technologies that shape our lives, organizations, and societies. From building the early online commerce and banking platforms in North America and Europe in the 90s, Sami has also spent several years with various aspects of the mobile business, from application development to network systems research for Nokia in Finland. Since 2009, Sami has lived in Australia and he held several senior roles at Telstra, spanning from CEO communications to innovation program management. He created and led the strategic foresight practice for several years, which focused on long-term technology and related trends and how they impact business, industry, and society at large. He's currently a research affiliate at the Institute for the Future, a senior industry fellow at RMIT Forward, the vice president of Finland Australia Chamber of Commerce, as well as he runs a consultancy organization called Transition Level. Sami holds a master's degree in computer science from the University of Helsinki, and he's an extreme learner, and his current research interests include mindful application of artificial intelligence, hence he's here, and other automation, and the impact of automation on the skill degradation, complex systems, and architecting for resilience. So welcome again, Sami. I'm a mouthful, your official bio, but I didn't feel like cutting off anything.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Excellent. And might be worthwhile to share, how I connected with Sami, or he connected with me, I should say, was through the Mindful Automation Manifesto he wrote a while ago. And the Mindful Automation Manifesto, if you go mindfulautomation.com.au, I'll add the details and the links. The link for the recording later. It encompasses 10 guiding principles from ethical decision making to human well-being, centric design and regulation and oversight. So a very interesting piece to have a look. So, Sami, how about, this is your formal official bio. How about we do a rapid fire question to learn a little bit more about you and what we cannot find in your LinkedIn profile?
Sounds good. Let's go.
Okay. So let's start with the basics. Let's start with, how do we pronounce your name correctly, please?
That's a loaded question. So officially it is Sami Mäkeläinen, but everybody in English-speaking countries calls me Sami. So whenever now somebody says Sami, I'm like, who?
Fair enough. Okay. And which city, which country were you born, Sami?
I was born in Tampere, Finland, which is a couple of hours north of the capital.
Excellent. Favorite drink?
Water. Water is my favorite thing. When you're thirsty, nothing tastes better than some clean, cold water.
Beautiful, especially pure water, right? Favorite music or favorite song?
I don't normally listen to a lot of music. For some reason, though, probably because it was the music that I kind of grew up listening to when I was a teenager. The music that most often works for me, in a flow state, whether it's coding or writing, is The Prodigy.
Okay, I need to look it up. What do you do to keep yourself mentally and physically fit?
Well, the two go together, right? So I think walking and swimming are my two favorite physical activities, and then on the mental side, just reading and learning stuff is how I relax, basically.
Excellent. And what would you do if you're not working in the tech space?
I would be a commercial pilot. So I was this close to becoming a pilot before I really went into IT, but that's a story for another time.
Cool. Favorite city?
I have lots of them. I have to say, however, that Melbourne was the first city where I noticed myself thinking, where should I live next? So maybe from that perspective of being a home, it's Melbourne. Helsinki is pretty great in summer too, though, and I do enjoy some American cities as well, like Boston, where I used to live earlier, and San Francisco.
Wonderful. And maybe one fun fact or something that we wouldn't find looking at your LinkedIn profile.
I think one thing would be that despite some of the criticism and critique I quite often have on the social platforms, I am actually an optimist. For many broader challenges that the world is facing, however, it's what I call post-mortem optimism. In other words, I think things will get better, but not before I'm dead.
Okay, thanks, Sami. All right, so how about we start talking about the speed of adoption? I think it's very timely. The speed of adoption of AI. We spoke about the difference between the speed of adoption in the consumer space versus the corporate space. What are your initial thoughts on that topic?
So, initial thoughts on that topic is that it's adoption that actually creates the impact. So, technological capability in and of itself doesn't really have impact. It only becomes impactful once it's adopted, and whether it's adopted by corporations or consumers. And the interesting thing here is, of course, that the consumer adoption of ChatGPT in particular is basically a vertical line. So 100 million active users in 2 months is insane. And so it's fastest adoption of any consumer service ever, which basically means that we now have a lot of what are called secret cyborgs. So you have people using these services, using AI to sort of improve their productivity, but more often than not, they do in secret. So they don't tell their employers for many reasons, including that many employers have banned them from doing so.
Yes, indeed. And, being a lecture monarch, I can tell you we have many students making use. And, well, I'll leave comments aside, in the decisions and the approach that some universities are taking in relation to that. Okay, so I think that links really well to the topic of democratization of AI, and AI going open source. I think we have, people with different views around the benefits of AI going open source and the impact to regulation and governance, being centralized versus being open. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, so a lot is made about democratizing AI and how it would be beneficial if it was like an open source thing that everybody would have their own system. If or when we have like an individually run open source AI tools that anyone can use and run on their hardware, I don't know if that would actually be a better situation. So currently, you have these handful of giant players who are at the leading edge of the AI game, and despite the criticism that they're lacking in terms of ethical AI frameworks or exploring the unintended consequences, all of which is valid, they still have some safety guardrails in place in the centralized systems. When you have a world where anybody could run, say, a GPT-4 level model on their phone or their desktop, on their laptop, whatever, all of that goes out the window. There is no, you cannot enforce any of the safety guardrails if you have an open source system capable of GPT-4 level output. And that's a risk because GPT-3, which is a couple of years old now, initially that was also a massive endeavor. So you could only run it in a data center, but then Facebook came out with the Llama models, and there are a few other open source initiatives, which essentially means that you can now run a GPT-3 level model on your laptop. And I don't see why that wouldn't happen with GPT-4 as well, or GPT-4 level model. So when these small models actually catch up to some of the cutting edge stuff we have now, then I don't know what happens with regulation because it becomes unenforceable.
Which makes me think of the importance, of course, what to say, singing my own trumpet, whatever is the expression we have in English, I think that it highlights the importance of not only having governance and standards, which is what we call the top-down approach, but also having the bottom-up, which is machine learning experts and data scientists being very mindful of what they're doing in the core phase, because regulation policy can only contain so much with the especially with what you're sharing. And what comes to mind is also the something that as we discussed earlier, something that Stuart Russell calls keeping humans in the loop. The foresight or oversight of AI. So how do you see that that guideline from Stuart Russell, or that concept in general?
It really, so the devil is always in the details here. If you have a human in the loop, it really depends on how that's done. So for many systems and in many contexts, you could have a human in the loop in theory, but then the human may be so overloaded that they don't really have time to consider any of the, let's say a human gets to have a final say on something that the AI system recommends. Do they have time to actually make that judgment call? Or does the human just become like a stamp of approval for whatever the AI recommends, because they're under so much pressure to deliver whatever it is that they're delivering? So while
it's a Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, while on the theoretical standpoint, it's great to have human oversight, or in one form or another. Whether that oversight is effective or not is completely dependent on how you do that.
I see. And something that came up when we spoke last time, I was reviewing my notes, Sami, it's the accountability and humans. I can't remember if it was actually in this context that you mentioned that humans perhaps being blamed when decisions are made, when actually they were accountable, but they were not actually in charge. Is that relevant to this discussion?
Yeah, so that's the concept of the moral crumple zone. So we know in vehicles you have crumple zones in back and front of the car, which absorb the impact of a crash in order to protect the occupants. And a moral crumple zone is a situation where automation, whatever type of automation, often ends up putting people in the way that accountability and responsibility are no longer aligned. So people are still being held accountable for something that they don't do anymore, that they are not responsible for. So whenever key part of your task is taken over by automation, then if things are done right, you end up being the human in the loop. But what if the bulk of the work is now done by the automated system, whether it's AI or some other kind of automation, and then you are kind of left there as the accountable person for whatever the machine is doing? So these situations are cropping up increasingly in a whole variety of spheres. Like a very day-to-day example is all the support staff at a call center. So, Telstra or Optus screws up your phone bill and you call them to complain, and the poor people at the call center, they cop abuse from customers 24/7. It's not their fault that your phone bill was faulty. They become the moral crumble zone for the company, and essentially absorb all the blame for stuff that wasn't really their fault in the first place. And in many situations, even the legal liability rests on a human, even though they are no longer responsible for that.
I'm getting a feeling of something that we try, and we spoke about that as well, Sami. Something that we definitely advocate with the Mindful AI Manifesto is just highlight all the benefits that artificial intelligence bringing to humanity. And I think sometimes we can be, including myself, we can sound a bit negative and focus on the unintended consequence and the risks. And I believe from memory, I think you're a big champion of good use of AI, right? And you're also part of the AI for Good. I'm sure you have lots of good applications of AI. So by all means, for those watching us, just to highlight, would that be correct to say, Sami?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not advocating that we stop everything, or I don't think that we can. And human progress has for hundreds of years been about removing some tasks that we used to do. I mean, none of us make our shoes anymore, or very few people do. And we don't grow our own food. We don't forage for our own food. So we've kind of outsourced those tasks in some cases to humans, in other cases to machines. Over the past decade or so, many humans have outsourced their navigation skills to GPS systems. So you now use Google Maps or Apple Maps for getting somewhere as opposed to figuring it out yourself with maps. And all of that offloading inevitably changes humans. From a very even physical perspective, it changes how your brain works. And often it's fine. I mean, none of us, very few of us, I should say, really pine back for the day that we all grew our own food and we had to be like self-sustaining farmers. So in many situations, that has improved the world quite dramatically. Whether some of these capabilities that we're now outsourcing to machines should be done, that's an open question, because now it's becoming higher order systems or higher order tasks and roles and jobs. And this is where it gets more complicated, and where we should maybe not stop and think, but at least slow down to think whether something that we're in the process of automating, should it be automated? Do we want it to be automated? And if so, how? And this is so there are like three categories of things that AI will not do in the future. One is that things that it cannot do, and that's a diminishing circle. Then there's things that we don't want it to do, so where people would rather have a human. Many people probably like to go to a doctor and meet a human rather than an AI. I know I would like my barista to be a human as opposed to a robot. And the third category is things that we don't allow AI to do. And that's where regulation and legislation comes in. So currently, we don't allow pilots to be, or we don't allow aircraft to be fully autonomous, not commercial jets anyway. There's active discussion whether that should at some point in the future be allowed. And we don't know. But at least in that sphere, the discussion is being had because there is a strong regulatory framework around it. There is no such framework around many other professions. There is no regulation protecting accountants, for example, or paralegals, or content creators. So in many professions, that discussion is not being had, and that's very counterproductive and I would say dangerous.
Yes, and leaving that task to governments and countries, it's actually probably not the best approach either, right? Because it's too big of too complex to be handling that level.
Yeah, I think it's too complex of an issue for any one organization, whether it's government or organization, to manage by themselves. I mean, we've seen enough industries fail at self-regulation woefully that I don't feel comfortable having the AI or the tech industry self-regulate AI. But at the same time, the government side of regulation is often, to put it kindly, suboptimal.
Yes, and let alone regulation across countries, right? Because that's another issue with the race that is happening across countries, across the big 4 or 5 tech giants as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that ties into the question of, there was this famous letter calling for a pause on AI development for anything more advanced than GPT-4. And obviously that was never going to happen. We're never going to get a global pause on the development. And I don't think even the signatories of that letter actually believed that we would get a global pause. But what that letter did do, and to its credit, it kind of highlighted some of the issues that we need to be talking about. It would be amazing if we had like global guidelines, global enforceable and enforced guidelines for something like an ethical AI or mindful automation or whatever. yeah, judging from how well the world is cooperating on even more important issues like climate change, I don't necessarily see that happening.
Mm. Yes, which kind of leads me to the topic with the key reason why we started with the Mindful AI Manifesto is really around advocating for human values in AI. So
Mm.
you touched on the word align before, and what comes to my mind is alignment problem. And I know that you're probably way more um, informed about the alignment problem than I am. So curious to hear what are your initial thoughts on that topic, Sami.
Yeah, so the alignment problem is basically like how do we align or can we align the AI systems to human values? And it quickly becomes very complicated. So there are technical ways that you can do alignment better than it is done now. At the same time, there is a very wide variety of human values as such as well. You know, the Australian values are not the same as Chinese values, and subcultures within the countries will have different values, and how it's impossible. It's a mathematically impossible assignment for an AI to align to the whole spectrum of values a society has. So, then we go to the higher end values, like let's say the UN human rights, taking those as baseline values. And I believe we can do a better job there than we are doing up until now. Um, and I would like for there to be stronger values against things like misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, which is a clear risk in terms of AI systems and their sort of tendency to hallucinate. So we're seeing a lot of unintended misinformation as well. Um, but again, I understand it from a technical perspective. It is not an easy solution, or it is not an easy problem to solve, just because the models, the large language models in particular, are completely amoral in their relationship to truth, in that they don't know the concept of what is true and what is a lie.
Mm. Yeah, the understanding of the truth, which is another big topic. So, on the universal values, thanks for bringing that up, the complexity of it, right? On our website, on the mindfulaimanifesto.org, we have actually one graph which includes the 24 universal values as mapped by the University of Pennsylvania, decades ago. And that framework was a result of research conducted by Professor Martin Seligman, who is the godfather of positive psychology. So basically, I agree with you. There's so much complexity around different cultures and so on. But what they did, they conducted the research and they discovered that there are 24 what they call the universal values that across cultures, across times, are valued. By humans, regardless of geography, time, and so on. So that's why it is on our website, because it's our naive attempt to say, hey, there's a framework, there's something. And to be honest, last week I spoke with a machine learning specialist from Amazon. I don't want to disclose his name here because we're still trying to get him to be a speaker here, but there are, of course, implications with representing the company he works for. And then when I mentioned that framework, he said, "Yeah, we totally could use this to, train the models. So, we can really feed models whatever we want. And this looks like probably a roughly solid a framework. But I agree with you; it's complex. And as you said before, Sami, the devil is in the detail. How we decode what kindness is. There are probably a number of behaviors and mindsets around kindness, but how can we really teach AI? Kindness, and how does that take priority in things like the trolley, and those dilemmas, where decision making needs to happen.
And I'm glad you mentioned that the model may be naive, but
Mm.
even though something is naive and we could never get to perfection by that, um, I think that's often used as an excuse to not even try, and that's wrong. So similar with unintended consequences. So often you hear the counter argument is that, well, we could never figure out all the unintended consequences, with the implied notion that, so why bother even trying?
Why bother? Yes.
Yeah.
Which is a very
And
lazy approach, isn't it?
right. Yeah. I mean, of course, we can never identify all the unintended consequences ahead of time. It's just, how complex systems work. But we could very feasibly identify a whole lot more than we do today. So, no, we can't be perfect, but we can do much, much better. And arguably, we should do much, much better than we have so far, considering the costs of getting it wrong are pretty high.
Precisely. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If you think about the trade-off there, worthwhile the investment. I should stop talking because we have just before less than 5 minutes, and you're the one to be talking. So I'm conscious of time, and we covered some of the topics that I was expecting to. But anything else that comes to mind before we go through, some final questions, Sami? Anything that you'd like to share from your end?
I think just touching on the previous point that, nobody is aiming at perfection and nobody expects perfection, but that does not mean that we shouldn't be doing anything. So it's kind of like the drug laws argument. So, we have laws against drugs. They don't eliminate, or crime in general, they don't eliminate all crime, but nobody is arguing for there not to be any laws against crime, even if they can't solve the entire problem. So whatever we can do, even if the approaches can be naive, even if there are some unintended consequences in the solutions themselves, we can and should try harder.
Yes, thank you. And what's coming to my mind now is it's been a while ago, and please correct me if I'm wrong, when Google CEOs was inviting the White House, after Jeffrey Hinton made those statements in the media. And I think the US actually decided to invest more in research. For me, was really good news, research around AI ethics and so on. So hopefully we'll see more investment in that space. And you being a researcher, Sami, what are your thoughts? Giving your background in research.
It's been interesting watching some of these U.S. congressional hearings around AI and some of the other topics. I think the AI hearings were, markedly better than the social media hearings a while back, where some of the questions were, shall we say, uninformed. But the AI thing it was a little bit better. I do think that there is a risk that some of these major players are quite explicitly, at the same time, interestingly, asking for regulation, but also proposing that, we can come up with the regulation that industry should self-regulate or at least dictate what regulation looks like. And I'm just worried that purely because financial incentives are there, they're going to try to offload some of the consequences to society at large, externalize all the risks.
That's another big red flag. So with that said, Sami, we do have on our website a list of challenges, and I still haven't figured out how to share here and present slides, so I don't have that. I don't know if you have the website ready that you could refer to, but from the challenge that we listed on our website, does any of those comes to mind that you resonate the most with, if any?
Yeah, so all the challenges are important, right? And I'm a little bit, I don't want to pick one, but I do think that one of the major challenges that we have is, how do we take these powerful tools and use them without breaking society? And that ties into a number of the challenges over there. And one of the things that, it's mentioned that we've got algorithms as a black box. And that's true. They are a black box. In many cases, most neural networks are black boxes. However, so are humans. So, we know humans, when challenged and asked, like, well, what did you do that for? Humans will tell you why. But we also know from psychological research that what they tell you is usually a confabulation. and it may not be at all why they did that. So humans will give you a plausible explanation of something which may not be accurate, but we take it at face value more often than not. So from that perspective, by criticizing some of these AI models to be black boxes, we are holding them to a higher standard than we are humans, which is interesting.
Wow. You just opened my mind right there, Sami, because I was the one to write that statement around black boxes. Being a programmer in my past life, I called them myself. And the idea that, machine learning experts, they don't really understand why. If I look back at the code, the code that I wrote in the past, I could tell exactly, if I was debugging why, the program, went into if or case or whatever, path in the code. But you're right in terms of expectations with humans as well. So good point. Good point. In terms of the initiatives, we mentioned a few initiatives there. Do you resonate with any of those at all?
Yeah, so I'd like to maybe point to 1 and 4. I mean, 1 is creating bite-sized and accessible information, and 4 in terms of encouraging mindfulness, coaching, and leadership development for this. A lot of it comes down at this point in time, and this will change as time goes on. But at this point in time, a lot of it comes down to education. So we have decision makers who don't understand these systems. Unbiased information is hard to come by because, as we have seen and we just discussed, some of the tech leaders are positioning themselves to be the advisors to the government. So they need alternative voices there, and this is where easily accessible information for consumers and policymakers alike would be helpful.
Thank you, and that's part of our intention really with the Mindful AI Manifesto. And then finally, you wrote the Mindful Automation Manifesto, which is a beautiful piece. Highly recommend everyone to go mindfulautomation.org.au.com.au. 10 principles beautifully written. So what would you say what mindful AI means to you? Because we're talking about AI ethics, responsible AI, safe AI. If you had to define in your own words what mindful AI it's to you, what would you say?
I think it represents like a genuine effort to do it right, or at least better than we currently do. As much as some of us would like at times, we can't just dismiss AI as technology, nor can we bury it as technology or stop the progress or rewind the progress. But we can still decide how to use it, and we can shape the progress in better directions. So while it does feel sometimes that the way AI is going is kind of analogous to climate change in the sense that there are no more solutions, there are only responses. Nevertheless, some of the responses are more constructive and better than others.
Thank you. And last not least, we're a little bit over time, but given that you mentioned the movement as well in the Mindful Automation Manifesto, and you are kind of, if I'm allowed to say, kind of contemplating becoming an ambassador for the Mindful AI Manifesto. Here, maybe / Finland, perhaps remotely, being the remote ambassador for Finland. Why do you think having a movement like a grassroots movement is important in addition to regulation and policies? What's your view on the importance of a movement?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any significant shift in this will need both top-down and bottom-up approaches, and it kind of comes back to the previous answer in that doing the implementation and exploration mindfully is our best chance of getting through this transition, more unscathed than we otherwise would. And that applies to things like mindful regulation as well. I mean, mindful AI or mindful automation, it sounds like a soft tool, but it's also critical for it to inform some of the hard tools like regulation as well.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Sami, for saying yes to have this conversation, for preparing to be here. and sharing your thoughts so openly, transparently. And is that okay for me to say, if people want to connect with you, they are welcome to reach out on LinkedIn? Would that be fair?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Wonderful. Oh, very good. Thanks so much again for your time, and I'll reconnect to you soon.
Thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Okay, likewise. Bye for now.
Bye now.